Welcome to the African Strata, where every layer tells a new story. Support the channel. Like, subscribe, and share for more real African stories.
I'll say it straight. If you've been getting rich off our gold while our kids drink dirty water, you deserve to be dragged out in handcuffs. And that's exactly what happened last Tuesday morning. I was standing outside my neighbor's shop when I saw the first convoy. Black trucks, armed officers, no warning. They headed straight for the big hotel on the main road, the one we all know the foreigners stay in. Within minutes, they were pulling men out in pajamas, their wrists cuffed, faces pale. Some folks here clapped, others just stared. A few whispered, "Careful, they might come back for revenge." Me? I thought, finally. Finally, someone's saying what we've all been saying for years. We've been robbed in broad daylight, and no one cared. Until now. But here's the thing. Depending on who you ask, this is either justice or it's a dangerous move that's going to cost us more than we can imagine. By the time I left the shop and made it down to the market, the air was buzzing. Not from the flies, but from everyone talking at once. Every corner I passed, someone was retelling the same story in their own version. The numbers kept changing. 5, 7, 9. One kid swore his uncle saw the arrests with his own eyes outside the Crystal Tower Hotel. Another man claimed he'd been inside the bank when officers came in and froze the accounts on the spot. At first, I thought it was just another rumor. We've heard so many over the years, about new deals, new taxes, new leaders promising change. Most fade by sunset, but this one, it kept growing. Near the fish stall, a group huddled around a radio that was crackling with the midday news. The announcer's voice was steady, but you could feel the weight of it. Multiple executives from foreign mining corporations have been detained in coordinated operations across the capital. Bank accounts linked to these companies are frozen. All gold shipments scheduled for export are now under state control until further notice. I stopped walking. That last part, gold under state control, hit different. We'd been talking about our gold for years, but always in a bitter, hopeless way. We knew it left the country in trucks and planes, but no one had ever stopped it. The conversations around me turned heated. A young man selling vegetables said, "Good. Let them see how it feels to lose something that isn't theirs." The shopkeeper next to him shook his head. "You think they'll just accept this? The West will punish us. Sanctions, price hikes, maybe worse." And honestly, I couldn't dismiss either side. I'd seen foreign aid dry up in neighboring countries over smaller things, but I'd also seen children in my village drink brown water while gold, worth millions, left our soil every week. Then the rumors got wilder. Someone said special forces hit the airport too, caught one executive trying to fly out on his private jet. Another claimed drones were used to track down a convoy carrying unreported gold ore. I couldn't tell which was true, but I knew one thing. For the first time, the people taking from us were the ones being chased. On my way back, I passed the old tailor's shop. He was leaning against the doorframe, smiling to himself. "You hear the news, son?" he asked. When I nodded, he said, "I've waited 50 years to see this day." I didn't ask what he meant. I think we both knew. You want to know why people here didn't cry for those men in handcuffs? Because for as long as I can remember, we've been living in the shadow of their profits. I grew up in a town just 15 kilometers from one of the biggest gold mines in the country. Every day, trucks rumbled past carrying ore worth more than my whole street would earn in a lifetime. We knew the numbers. Everyone did. Foreign companies have taken more than $480 billion in gold over the past 2 decades. And you know how much made it back here? Barely 2%. The rest, gone. Offshore accounts, foreign banks, luxury homes in cities we'll never see. Meanwhile, the well in our village still runs brown half the year. The clinic? One nurse, no doctor, and shelves lined with empty bottles. Kids drop out of school to help their parents dig through scraps for a few specks of gold dust. Illegal, dangerous, but what choice do they have? We've heard all kinds of promises from leaders over the years. Each time they'd sign a new deal with the mining companies. Each time they'd stand on TV and talk about jobs and investment. And each time, nothing changed, except maybe a few more fancy cars in the capital. I remember once hearing on the radio about a minister in 2015 taking a 50 million bribe to cut mining taxes from 30% down to just 3%. 3%. It was like handing over the keys to our gold and saying, take as much as you want. So I'm curious, if this happened where you live, would you stay quiet because that's how the system works? Or would you want someone to tear the whole thing down and start fresh? Tell me in the comments, because that's the choice we've been living with for decades. And here's the thing. In the months before the arrests, we started noticing things. Not big enough to make the news, but strange. Unmarked cars driving into mine sites late at night. Drones buzzing overhead, even in restricted areas. Guys in plain clothes asking questions at the market about shipments and workers. We didn't know it then, but the fuse was already lit. Funny thing is, we didn't even realize we were living in the middle of an investigation. To us, it just looked like odd little changes. The first time I noticed was on a Tuesday. Two men in plain clothes walked into the mine's supply depot. No uniforms, no badges, just clipboards and a look that said they weren't there to shop. A week later, I saw a drone hovering over the East Pit, the part they always kept closed off. Everyone knew that was where the highest grade ore came from, but we'd never been allowed near it. Then there were the unmarked trucks. Not the usual mining convoys. These were smaller, with military plates, rolling in late at night and leaving before dawn. One driver at the roadside cafe swore they were carrying samples straight to the capital for testing. By the third month, the whispers started. Some said the government was finally building a case. Others said it was just another inspection before signing yet another crooked deal. Nobody knew for sure, and honestly, most of us had learned not to get our hopes up. Still, there was something different this time. It wasn't just locals asking questions. We started seeing foreigners who didn't act like the usual mining executives. No suits, no big cars. They dressed simple, spoke little, and always seemed to be listening more than talking. Later, I found out they were international financial crime experts brought in quietly to help. If you'd been in our shoes, would you believe the government was finally on our side? Or would you think it was all just theater until proven otherwise? I'm still not sure what I believed back then. And then, just as people started to forget about it, it happened. The kind of morning that stamps itself into your memory forever. You don't forget a morning like that. The sun had barely started to warm the streets when the first sirens cut through the air. Not the usual ambulance or police wail. This was deeper, urgent, almost military. I stepped outside just in time to see the first convoy. Black armored trucks, headlights still on in the dim light, rolling past like they owned the road. Men in full tactical gear, helmets, vests, rifles, faces hidden behind visors. They weren't here to ask questions. The convoy didn't stop in our town, but we all knew where it was headed, the capital's luxury district. 10 minutes later, my cousin called from near the Crystal Tower Hotel. Breathless, talking so fast I could barely catch the words. They're pulling them out in pajamas, handcuffed, cameras everywhere. By mid-morning, the operation had spread. Special units hit the airport. One executive was intercepted at the VIP gate, boarding pass in hand for a private jet bound for Dubai. Another was caught at a bank, trying to withdraw $5 million in cash. At the western border, a convoy carrying unreported gold ore, worth an estimated $60 million, was stopped and redirected under armed guard. The names came next. Victor Petro of Goldmax Corporation, Jean-Claude Dubois of Western Gold Mining, Michael Thompson of Pacific Resources. Each one a symbol of the wealth pulled from our ground and sent overseas. In less than 2 hours, 9 arrests, 12 bank accounts frozen, 4 gold shipments seized. Local TV cut regular programming for rolling coverage. For the first time, the cameras weren't at some international press conference. They were on our streets, showing our people watching this happen live. Some cheered in the background of the footage. Others stood with arms crossed, skeptical. One man near the camera said, "This is good theater, but let's see if it lasts." That line stuck with me because it's exactly the question we were all asking in our heads. So tell me, if you saw this happen in your country, would you believe justice was finally here? Or would you think it's just another performance before everything goes back to the way it was? By noon, our market was louder than I'd ever heard it. Not from sellers shouting prices, but from everyone talking over each other. Half the stalls had radios on full blast. Some people were smiling for the first time in months. Others kept shaking their heads like they'd just watched a storm roll in. The younger crowd treated it like a festival. Kids climbed onto crates to see the tiny TV in the corner shop. One boy yelled, "They got Petro!" and the whole place erupted. Someone else shouted, "Dubois too!" And that set off another round of cheers. But the older folks, they'd seen too much. The tailor from across the street leaned in and whispered, "Careful, boy. This is how wars start. Embarrass the wrong people, and they'll come for you." On social media, the reaction split right down the middle. The hashtag Justice for Our Gold was trending by afternoon, flooded with clips of the arrests and chants from the streets. But another tag, economic suicide, was catching up fast, pushed by people warning of sanctions, job losses, and foreign investors pulling out. The first international statements were already in. Paris called the arrests deeply concerning for investor confidence. London urged restraint and dialogue. Washington stayed quiet. But one American business news channel ran a headline, "Is this the end of Africa's open market era?" In the middle of all this, my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin in the capital. "They're sealing the mines. No one goes in or out. Soldiers everywhere." It hit me. This wasn't just a few arrests. This was the start of something much bigger, and nobody knew how far it would go. And that's the part that kept me awake that night. Not the cheering, not the threats, but the silence from those who still had the most to lose. The first thing I heard from the courtroom wasn't the prosecutor's voice. It was a witness, a young man, maybe mid-20s, standing stiff in front of the judges. "I was 8 years old when they sent me underground," he said. No one in the room moved. "They paid me less than $1 a day. I coughed blood for months." That clip went viral before the day was over. Even people who didn't care about mining suddenly had an opinion. The trial itself was unlike anything we'd seen. 7 judges, no foreign observers from the countries where these companies were based. The charges filled pages: tax evasion, bribery, illegal land grabs, environmental destruction, even using cyanide waste to cut costs. The evidence was a punch in the gut. Emails between executives joking about creative accounting to hide shipments. Satellite images showing gold output 10 times higher than what was reported. Medical records from villages downstream of waste dumps, cancer rates 10 times the national average. One exhibit showed a fake invoice selling gold worth $60,000 a bar for just $10,000. Everything else siphoned into offshore accounts. The prosecutor said it plainly. They were not just stealing, they were poisoning our people and calling it business. I watched from my neighbor's living room, surrounded by a dozen people. Some were angry, muttering curses at the screen. Others just sat quiet, eyes locked, like they were seeing their whole life explained in documents and photographs. The verdict came fast, faster than anyone expected. Guilty. Every single one. Sentences ranging from 40 years to life, billions in fines. And then the part no one saw coming. The court seized everything, yachts, villas, art collections, and ordered it all sold, with proceeds going directly to the victims' families. In our village, someone shouted, "We're getting our money back." Another replied, "Don't celebrate too soon, they'll find a way to keep it." That's the thing about justice here. You believe it when you see it, and sometimes not even then. The morning after the verdict, our village square looked different. Not because any buildings had changed overnight, but because people's faces had. There was this mix of disbelief and cautious hope, like we'd just been told rain was coming after years of drought. By 10 a.m., the first official trucks rolled in, not police this time, but government workers with clipboards. They went door to door, taking down names, family sizes, and what people had lost to the mining operations. Word was spreading that the first compensation payments could start within weeks. The radio reported that over $7.4 billion in seized cash had already been transferred into a national victims fund. Properties, mansions, high-rise apartments, even entire farms, were being auctioned, with proceeds earmarked for affected communities. One official said on air, "Not 1 cent of this will go to the state budget. It will go directly to the people." Down at the market, some folks were already spending like the money was in their pockets. One man bought a brand new generator for his shop. Another said he'd finally send his daughter to the city for school. But there were also voices warning, don't trust until the cash is in your hand. Then came the news that shook even the skeptics. The mines would stay shut to foreign operators permanently. The government was setting up a state-owned company to run them, with 70% of profits legally bound for schools, hospitals, and clean water projects. I'd never heard a law like that in my lifetime. In the space of 24 hours, we'd gone from spectators to shareholders, at least on paper. Whether that paper would hold up, that was the question hanging over every conversation. 3 months later, I stood in the same village square where we'd watched the first trucks roll in. This time, I was looking at a brand new water pump, shining under the midday sun. Kids were filling buckets with clean, clear water, something I hadn't seen here since I was a child. Across the street, the old clinic had doubled in size. Fresh paint, new beds, stocked shelves. A doctor from the capital now visited twice a week. I even saw a delivery of textbooks for the school. Real, new textbooks, not the faded, torn ones we'd been using for years. On the radio, they listed the numbers. 118 schools under construction. 47 hospitals in progress. 1,300 kilometers of new roads already paved. Over 500 water wells drilled in rural areas. And in the mines? Wages were up from $50 a month to $500. Child labor, gone. Accident rates, zero. Still, not everyone was convinced. Some feared the government would mismanage the new wealth. Others worried foreign powers would find a way to force their way back in, through sanctions, debt traps, or worse. Me? I'd seen enough broken promises to know one good season doesn't guarantee the harvest will last. But I'd also seen the look on those kids' faces at the water pump. And I knew, whatever happens next, they'll remember this moment. So here's my question to you. Is this the start of a new chapter or just a pause before the old story returns? Because where we go from here might depend on whether the rest of the world is ready for us to stand on our own.